Really excited about this one because I have a treat for you. Now, most of you know that I do clinical supervision. I do it the telehealth way, which means I see people over the computer. It's not really telehealth, it's just supervision over the internet. And bravely, 3 people in my group supervision, Heather, Allison, and Tori, have agreed to do an episode based on our supervision. And I am so thrilled to have this because we don't get to see group supervision live very often. We got the appropriate permissions, nothing confidential is being talked about. We're just going to talk about some issues. And their bravery and courage is on full display here. So I look at this as a real teaching tool to our younger clinicians and graduates. So sit back, get comfortable, and enjoy.
Before we get to any of that, how's everybody's weekend?
It's good.
All right. Allison, did you play with your plants?
Yes, and I played with a new type of plant. I'm gonna try aquascaping, so like aquarium plants, things like that. So something new.
Very cool.
Yeah.
What did you call that? Aquascaping?
Aquascaping. So like you have like your aquarium and you create like a little underwater ecosystem with plants and things like that. So
Wow.
thought why not?
Allison, you're like the Jane Goodall of plants. You immerse yourself.
Always gotta try something new.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So one thing that we do a lot in our group is we laugh, and that did not happen overnight. It really takes a certain degree of vulnerability and trust to be able to laugh like this. And so this is something they've all built towards. And we don't always do a check-in. We did on this particular day. I think check-ins can be very effective. I think they can also run a little too long. But if you're going to structure your group supervision, a check-in is not a bad idea. Just kind of see where everybody's at.
Okay. Tori, how was your weekend? Did you go out and run?
I did. Yeah.
You did.
I ran a lot. Yeah.
You did.
It was nice on Saturday.
Well,
I
I
heard.
ran on my treadmill,
Oh,
but either way, it was nice inside my house.
there you
Right?
So Tori, you literally get out there and run those steep Duluth hills?
No, I run on the treadmill. Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
So you never do the hills?
No. I mean, I've done
No.
5Ks here in Duluth and stuff, but it's usually pretty flat. From the ones that I did, it was like down in Canal. So
Gotcha. Yeah. Because one time we had to park our car at oh gosh, what's that cute little like pub that looks like it's like from old England on
Quakers?
London Road?
Or Dublin?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Like right downtown area?
Yeah, it's
So just real quick, a couple of the supervisees live in the Duluth, Minnesota area. Duluth's a great place. It's very hilly, so if you try to run it or walk it, you get tired pretty quickly. And so that's what we're referring to.
so cute, but realizing how out of shape I was, having to walk up, from that place, like good God, think that the parking garage
It's
was, not
hardcore.
further away. Yeah, yeah. But wouldn't that be a great way to get in shape? Just park somewhere in Duluth, walk down, and then walk back up. And yeah, you will feel it. Yeah. Heather, how was your weekend?
I ended up not feeling well, so it was a lot of rest and sleep.
Good.
So I just came into the office a little on Saturday and just didn't feel good, so I left and went home and slept. I think Sunday I slept like 15 hours.
Wow.
So I listened to my body.
That's good.
And I set a
That's
firm boundary of self-care of if I need to sleep, I need to sleep, guilt-free,
Yeah.
and I did.
Okay. I like the guilt-free part.
Mhm.
Yep.
Heather, I really hope this year you don't have to deal with nearly the medical stuff.
Mhm.
You just need to have a great year.
Yeah, I agree.
So here's the beginnings of some vulnerability too, where Heather talks about some of her struggles, and just an incredibly honest person. And the word boundaries and self-care are going to come up quite a bit, but that's a good introduction to some of the material we're going to talk about during the group.
I'm all about it. I'm all
I
about
know.
it.
I know. Well, we're all pulling for you. All right.
Yeah, I just think it's a little bug. It was
What's
just
that?
a little bug. I think it was just a little bug going around.
I woke up today, and yesterday we had almost all, not all the snow gone, but damn near. And I see this light dusting on the car again. I'm like, really? Can't this end? It's April 3rd.
Yep,
Yeah,
it's great.
this is so ridiculous. All right, so here's how I want to jump into this today. So, have I ever told any of you about my bad boundaries in the past with work?
I can't
Or maybe I
recall.
have in bits and pieces. Yeah. So when I first became an LGSW, which is, the precursor to LICSW, I remember I think I did have 16 DAs on the books. I really think it was 16. Because what they do is the minute you become eligible to write an assessment, they take the new people, they say, okay, where can we send them? So my base was in Bemidji, but then I ended up going to Park Rapids, Pine River, um, Bagley, Clearbrook, all these different places, because if you can write the assessment, they're going to give you the task. And I remember thinking, because Heather, I think you've had 16 too, right? Was that your maximum?
So real quick, one of the things I truly believe in my heart of hearts is doing supervision, you need to model failure and success. And so one of the things I try to do is tell my supervisees, here's where I've screwed up, here's where I've been successful, and here's where my boundaries have not been very good. And here's a great example of where my boundaries were terrible. And thematically, you'll see this come out again and again in this session, which is, when do we apply boundaries? When are we given permission as young clinicians to put boundaries in place?
I think 17.
So you had
16.
one more.
Wow.
No, 16 was my max in a month. Yep.
Okay. That's a lot. So I was on the way to Pine River to do an assessment. I don't know how many I had at that point, probably 10, 11. And you start thinking about all these different details, because what I tried to do is write a bunch of them simultaneously. And I started to crisscross the information thing, and this is not good. And I literally pulled over. Yeah. And I called my clinical supervisor. I said, you can't give me any more assessments, because I am starting to pollinate the information all the wrong ways. And I remember how guilty I felt. And that's one of the main reasons I want to talk about this, is because what kept me going was guilt. Because you know what I did? I did take more DAs after I said no, because I didn't want to be the person to say no. I didn't want to have that label. And I can't tell you how bad or good those DAs were, but I'm guessing a lot of them were pretty bad, because I was in such a hurry to kick them out. But that was sort of the start of my poor boundaries, which have gotten a lot better. So I'm going to ask you all, when your boundaries have been really, really bad with your work, what does it look like for you? Has it looked similar to what I went through?
Yeah, I mean, when I first started after my internship and I was hired on, given a very high caseload right out of the gate. I think I had an IC, 6 to whatever age. I have no cutoff. And I think my caseload was like 48. And I was looking at my schedule and I'm like, oh my gosh, I have 16 DAs this month. I think that was the second month of working. And I take time.
And just real quick, 48 is a huge caseload to walk into when you're a new clinician. To me, that's borderline unimaginable, but it happens.
Coming from a school environment where everything is very thorough, very detailed, you don't miss things, and then transitioning and learning the model that the agency wants. I mean, I was taking anywhere from 6 to 10 hours for DAs. And when you have 16 of them, it is, you can even hear it in my voice. Like I instantly you said guilt, Eric, but I felt fear.
Yeah.
Fear of failure and letting others down. I had pressure from other people that were going to be providing services like CTSS or ARMS, and they're like, we need this DA, we need this DA.
Yep.
So I'm getting emails of pressure like, you need to get this done, but how do you do that?
So Heather brings up just a phenomenal point, because it's easy to forget that so many of our assessments and things we have to do are driven by outside resources. So a court may need something, a guardian ad litem. And for you new clinicians out there, you're not going to just get this pressure from the agency. You're going to get pressure from case managers, again, the court, all these different places. And I can't do the math. I think I say that in a little bit here, but 16, 17 DAs times 10, that's like a whole week to get those done. And so here's what that means. If you want to get them done in a timely manner, you're going to work weekends. And unfortunately, that is a path to burnout. And that will come up again in our dialogue as well.
And so it was so much pressure. And it was just, I'm failing right out of the gate. And I felt from the get-go I was failing. And I still challenge that. So I think a lot of my work was fear-based, and I would work insane hours. I did not take weekends off.
Yeah.
I just worked. I came in early, I stayed late, I worked all weekends, and it really affected my personal life, my relationships.
Yeah.
And I just never kind of got out of that survival mode until I started to establish the no. I can't do anymore. And at times, even me saying no has not been respected because I am new. Well, she just needs to take it. She just
Reminds me of,
take the client.
it reminds me of our former supervisor who said, I haven't earned the right to say no. That never left me, Heather, and I think that applies to you too.
And I finally gained the courage to say, I can't have any more clients. This is too much. I'm burning out. And I established that firm no, but it was not always respected and heard. And I think that was very defeating for me. But I think now it is heard. It is respected.
This is a really good answer. Yeah, what? Heather, go ahead. I got you.
Oh.
Sorry.
That just came with time, I think. You know, and a lot of communication
Right,
on my
right.
part.
So, Tori and Allison, when you guys first got into it and you have a chance to set your boundaries or not, what is your story of how that either came to be, or if you're still struggling with it, why are you still struggling with boundaries?
I think for me, I can relate a lot to what Heather talked about, you know, because when I started, I mean, I walked into a full caseload, it was high 30s, and there was such a need for services at that time here in the school, and so I just kept saying, yep, just refer them,
And this is so common that as new clinicians too, you want to build up your caseload. And so you literally will not say no, just in an attempt to build your caseload up. And so when you hear about this, 30, 40 clients, again, it is a lot. And in Allison's world, which is school-based, that's a whole other world, and you'll get some insights into that as well.
Two didn't have good boundaries starting out in terms of how late is too late to be working. And so sometimes I would work till 5:30, and then, you know, I at that time I wasn't working weekends. Say yes.
Thank you.
And I have kind of breached my own boundaries, and like specifically working in the high school, I have breached that within myself in terms of, okay, I'll work with these middle school kids since they're coming to the high school next year. So I know over time it's gotten better, but there are still times where I feel like I can't say no, because the kids that are getting referred usually are higher needs, and I feel like I can't say no to that. And I also have that fear of failure with here in the school, because when I first started, I came in at a time where there was high turnover rate in this particular position, and I sensed that the school was getting tired of that, and I didn't want to let the school down or let the kids down.
That's a great point too. Being in an environment where there's high turnover and the position or the person in the position before you quit and that person before them quit, you're going to feel that additional pressure to succeed. And I think that's a great point that Allison brings up.
Down. So I love my job, you know, but I feel like there's just been this additional pressure to stay. So that's where I feel like you really need to keep your boundaries in check to avoid burnout, to avoid letting people down. So yeah, I mean, over time, I know it's definitely gotten better, but I still feel like I feel bad when having to put my foot down, like, okay, I'm going to just stop taking referrals at this time. I'm just going to start a wait list. You know, I feel bad about that, you know, but I'm thinking about it and it's like, there's only so much I can do in a day. And there's only so many hours in a day that I can work here and see kids. And if there's not enough room, then there's not enough room. You know, I can't make an additional 2 hours in a 24-hour day. So
It'd be awesome if you could.
I know, I wish. So yeah, it's just kind of
That's-
keeping in check, you know, what are my limits and, you know, not being afraid to put your foot down no matter how you.
So this is really cool because Allison's got a great sense of humor, and you can tell that she's got a pretty big workload, and I think her humor definitely helps negate some of the real negative effects of that. And so here's a good example of somebody that I think is dealing with things in a very healthy way, still feels some stresses, still growing. She's a relatively new clinician, but also very, very mature and knows herself very well. I think that comes through very strongly here.
It feels because at the end of the day, I'm a human being just like everyone else, and I have a life outside of work. So yeah, it's just been a delicate balance of, you know, trying to find a happy medium of taking referrals and pausing, making a wait list.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I want to ask you, Allison, if you do say no, if you say, you know what, I can't take anymore, I can't take these outside kids, what would happen? Where would you get the most flack from?
See, I don't know if I'd get flack. I know I've tried to put my foot down initially when I was getting outside referrals to take on as clients.
Yep.
And it didn't work. It just keeps coming back up. And so that's been really frustrating because it's like I didn't sign on to work at this other school. I signed on to work at this school. And
Right.
so, and I get that we have a provider shortage. I understand that, but it's like there's only so much I can do, you know, and I always keep in the back of my mind, my clients first are here. These are the clients that are my priority. So it sucks that it keeps coming back up as pressure to, oh, can you do this? Can you do that? And it's like, I could, but you know, I'm trying to keep my kids a priority too. So yeah.
Do you ever feel taken advantage of?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
You didn't even blink when you said
No,
that.
no, because I know I can get a DA done in a couple of days and I know like I can do it, you know,
Yeah.
and I feel like it's just hard, you know, as a clinical trainee to find that voice in terms of you're new. So can you really put your foot down? And, you know, am I being taken advantage of for my work ethic, the quality of work that I do, the fact that I'm easily accessible?
Something to be mindful of. No one is going to tell you when you can put your foot down. There is no training course out there that definitively says now you can set your boundaries. You almost have to test them and see how people react. If you're at an agency, if you're in a private practice, wherever. And so when we talk about when it's time, you have to make that determination and live with the consequences. And that sounds pretty harsh, but it is the reality of mental health.
Accessible, you know, to getting these things done. So yeah, I mean, it's hard.
It is hard. See, you, Heather, and I all have the same problem, which is we don't want to disappoint people.
Right.
I don't know why we have that affliction, but for whatever reason, it's in our DNA because I still feel it too. I don't want to go through the feeling of disappointment. I don't like that feeling.
Right.
Now, I'm going to pick on you, Tori, because it's just time. Because I don't think you struggle with that as much.
No, I don't. I just
I know.
I love it. We can learn from you. Absorb.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, this is great. Getting back to the humor we use in a group session, but you're going to see Tori really become vulnerable here and share something that when she said it during the group, I just, it really resonated with me because again, you don't hear this a lot. And so she very courageously shares some personal details about her work life.
You know, I've seen those pictures like where it's like you're replaceable at work but not at home. And I've always really taken that to heart. And like my baby is my number one and she will always be my number one. And so like I mean today, okay, so I'm on spring break this week technically. And today I am meeting with a student to do a DA. So there is a little bit where it's like, okay, I don't have to, but this is a high risk kid and it needs to be done. So I'm willing to meet with this kid for a little bit today. But like I'm not making any promises that I'm going to get the DA done this week or like because this is my week off. So
Right.
yeah.
Tori, have you always had good boundaries like this?
No.
Hmm.
No.
So yeah, go ahead.
There was a point where I was really sick. And I mean, like, I just worked and worked and worked. And I just got to the point where it was like, and this was before I was in grad school or anything, but I got to the point where it was like, I want to go to treatment to get, like, as a break. I want to go. And that is a low for me. I think that, like, I want to get sick enough to go to treatment so I can get a break.
So really take note of what Tori's saying. Again, courageous beyond belief, but it's the reality. So when I talk about the work being dangerous, this is exactly what I'm talking about, because the work will take it out of you. And it will take it out of you in such a way where you do want to check yourself into a hospital because you have no energy left. So I'll say it again. The work is dangerous, and I'm very grateful to Tori for pointing that out.
I think that's very brave of you to say, and I wonder how many other workers think that, but would never dare utter that phrase.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. There's kind of this saying in like addictions work that you sort of have to cross a line before you get help. You have to do something so horrible or have something so horrible happen. Tori, that's kind of your story, right? Something so bad had to happen before you looked and said, this is not worth it.
Yeah.
Okay. I like the honesty that's flowing. Monday morning seems to be our honest day where people just say what the frick they're going to say.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It is.
It is. I always go back to the difference between Monday and Thursday because it's so profound.
Yeah. We're starting the week off on a peaceful note. By Thursday, it's just ugly.
Right.
I know. Everybody's like, my God, please let Friday come sooner than it's going to.
Yeah, so sometimes we have to reschedule group just for various reasons. I've got something going on, and Thursday is typically the day that we reschedule. And there is a vast difference. Monday morning, people are kind of ready to go, kind of tired. By Thursday, there's just a much freer attitude. Not that it's always positive, but you can really track where people are at Monday through Thursday. There's definitely a progression.
I want to ask this too, because you've all got your direct supervisors too. How often do you talk about boundaries with your direct clinical supervisor? How often does that come up?
Almost every single time.
Okay.
Yep.
Heather, can you say more?
Yes. So I always put it on my agenda to discuss boundaries, whether it is related to the dreaded word self-care, more work, right?
Yes.
Or difficulty with communication because we're a community health center, so there's a lot of different moving parts, and sometimes boundaries can be lost in translation. And I think that's where my frustration came from, was when I established a boundary, the communication didn't flow. So my boundary was not heard. And I identified that through supervision. Was talking about like, hey, I set this boundary and communicated it. And then all of a sudden this client was in my schedule, and that was a client I was not able to see because of the heaviness and the high risk clients I already had. And so we processed through that and were able to identify like, okay, like Allison said, came in when there was a high rate of turnover. I came in during COVID. People were really, really stressed out and burned out. We didn't stop working. So that's something that I always started off with in supervision.
It's a great point Heather brings up. The high risk cases, and we could be talking about people with severe persistent mental illness, suicidal ideation, self-harm. These cases are just by nature going to take more energy out of you. And so, no, cases are not equal. People are equal, but cases are not always equal in terms of what they're going to take out of you. And so having a boundary that says, I can't take another suicidal client. Again, that doesn't come up very often either, but I think that's a very important point to think about for you new therapists that are just beginning your journey and doing supervision, understanding which cases tend to be the most depleting for you. And that can take some time. But generally high-risk cases, even cases that have a court affiliation, are going to be cases that tend to drain you a bit quicker.
Was how are the boundaries? How do I establish them? How do I keep them firm? So that's something that is brought up often. And I was always told they will take as much as you are willing to give. Others will take as much as others will take as much as you're willing to give. So when you say no, that's where you start. And that's
all right, so this is probably a great time to bring this up. So very few people in mental health are going to come to you and just say, hey, are you doing okay? You look like you might be burning out. It's unfortunate that so often it's left to the clinician to sort of be discovered in a negative state. And not that we should absolve all the responsibility off the clinicians, we shouldn't. But for a newer clinician, I am convinced that every supervisor should be going up to them at least once a week, and even outside of their supervision, asking, how are you doing? Where are you at mentally? What are you struggling with? Just so we form this connective tissue of, I really want to monitor how you're doing. And again, it's very hard to go to people anyway and say, well, I'm not doing very good. So I do put some of this back on the supervisors to go to these people, your supervisees, and just ask them, how are you doing?
That's across the board. Clients will take as much too.
That's also a way of saying, I think, Heather, that nobody's going to check on you until you say, I'm done.
Right. And that rings through my head often is like, if I don't speak and express how I'm feeling, if I'm overwhelmed or whatever, how do they know?
I wonder about that too, and I often think that when you look at people, there are indicators that say this person's not doing good, but and maybe it's that Midwest flavor where we don't want to impede on people though, because it's almost insulting to go to them and say, "Hey, are you burning out?" But I'm of a different mind, which is I think we should go to people and probably on a regular basis say, "How are you doing? How are you I don't think that happens enough. And that by itself is also Allison shaking her head, of course. So I think, again, that's such a huge part of it that we miss is just going to people saying, how are you doing? And it's so simple.
Yeah, absolutely.
Allison, how about you? Do you talk about boundaries with your clinical supervisor?
Yeah, I mean, I express boundaries within like clients that I feel like would be a good match, clients that wouldn't be a good match, because I feel like it's important to keep like my scope of like expertise, but like ability to work with a particular kiddo. So I always try and keep that in check, because if I feel like I can't do it, or if I don't feel like prepared enough, then maybe like an outside referral would be necessary. But in terms of like boundaries with these outside DAs. I have talked with my supervisor about this, and she's understanding. And she's always been such a great support and just a great supervisor just in this whole clinical trainee experience. So I really appreciate that about her. I just sometimes I still get that I feel bad about saying I don't know how much more of these outside Ds I can do. So yeah, I mean the communication's always been really great between me and my supervisor about boundaries. So it does come up, when necessary. But yeah, I mean I'll let her know when I'm feeling like okay, I'm kind of overwhelmed with my caseload right now. I'm just gonna pause on DAs. So yeah, I mean I feel really good support from her and yeah, I feel like she gets it. So
Yeah, and these three supervisees, I know all of their individual clinical supervisors, and they're outstanding. And I know for a fact they promote good boundaries. So that's really reflected here too. And again, you see the openness of the dialogue and the conversation. And that really comes through the healthy relationship with the clinical supervisors. I'm really glad that got displayed in the group that we decided to record.
that's really helpful.
Well, and I know you and Heather both have supervisors who very much are wonderful, I think, in how they project their boundaries. And yeah, Heather's shaking her head.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm
Because your
very, very
supervisor,
blessed.
Heather, his boundaries are as solid as they come, aren't they?
They're amazing. Yes, and I really absorb all of that. Like I strive for that level.
I'm guessing it did not come to him overnight, but probably through his own struggles have led him to say the buck stops here and this is how it's going to be. And I think we all admire him for that because he does not waver very much from those.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
And I've got to say he made it very clear to me. It is almost giving me permission. It's okay to say no. Enforcing that, like what's stopping you from saying no?
And that's great supervision right there. Saying to your supervisee clinically, it's okay to say no. What's stopping you from saying no? I love that came up. What a great question. What's stopping you from saying no?
And really reflect on what it is doing to me on a physical, mental, spiritual level. So when you're not saying no, what's happening?
I love that you had that conversation.
And so if you're saying no, if you're not saying no, look at all the things you can't say yes to.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty profound. And it's very true, isn't it?
It is.
Tori, what about you? Do you talk about boundaries? Do you need to talk about boundaries with your supervisor? Probably not.
She does check in with me just about like how my caseload is going, if it's too much, if I can handle more. And I'm very honest with her. Like right now, it's I feel comfortable with where it is. Just being newer, I think now that my coworker is back from maternity leave, that I could take some more kids. But yeah, I mean, we check in more on caseload, not like so much self-care stuff, but I feel like I'm pretty good with that on my own. So
It's amazing to me, and I've never really said this to Tori, but her boundaries are exceptional for being a younger clinician relative to me. And I think if I could offer the new therapist, and again, the new supervisees, the biggest piece of advice out there, it is that be willing to risk saying no, because Tori's that kind of person, and she's still got a job. All right. There's this fear that if I say no, it may all come crashing down. No, it's uncomfortable. It's just uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to say no, and it's really uncomfortable to get the feedback of saying no. I've been there, because nobody likes that word. Let's face it, nobody likes that word. But again, Tori's model of boundaries, being a younger clinician, this is what I want you to follow and really pay attention to.
Well, you hit the treadmill. I mean, we know that.
I do.
So you incline that bad boy too, because I do, and then I feel like blood's gonna spurt out of my nose after about 5 minutes. But
No, I I can't run at an incline. I've tried. It's just not.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll
Yeah,
walk
it's-
at one, but not run.
So you guys, I ended up getting one that has like, I think they're all pretty fancy these days, but you can stream that.
Okay, yeah, we go off topic sometimes. Sometimes I go off topic, and I think that's okay. There are peers out there that would challenge me and say, never get off topic in a therapy session or a group session. But I'm going to tell you the magic here and the secret to this. Putting in those fun little moments of self-reflection and sharing some details, again, it makes the group safe. And I'll say that again, it makes the group safe. Do not be afraid, and I say this to you supervisors out there too, do not be afraid to throw out there some fun little nuggets about your life, okay? Because again, the more you say, the more permission they feel to say. And I can't say that strongly enough.
Netflix and Amazon and all that. It's so cool. I can watch Gilmore Girls while I'm walking.
Nice.
Well, it's such a pure show. I mean, there's literally, it's so good natured. You gotta have you all seen Gilmore Girls? I don't know why I'm
Oh,
bringing
yeah.
this up, but
Yeah.
It's been a long time, but yes.
it's a classic, Heather. You should revisit it.
I'm really still in my crime shows.
I
I
understand.
still monitor myself when it gets too dark, when I'm like, okay, this is enough of ID discovery and oxygen. You need a little break, throw some comedy in. But
I know.
Hey,
Heather,
boundaries.
yeah. You can only watch so many serial killer documentaries, right? Before it starts to.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Just
I've
love
been there
how
too.
figuring out why.
I know. It's the great question revealed, isn't it?
Right.
I want to bring up something too, which is when we even say the word boundary, I was thinking about this. Does anybody even know what that means? Does anybody have their own definition of what boundary even means? I think we can recognize it, but is there a working definition of boundary?
For me, it's my line in the sand of, okay, like this is the line, and like this is as far as we can go with this. And if we cross it, then we really have to try and check ourselves of, okay, like why is that? Was it necessary? So I like to just keep it simple in my brain because I tend to overthink things. So I'm like, boundaries, boundaries, boundaries. Okay, my line in the sand, where is it? So
Um, I think we all overthink, but thank you for owning it for everybody.
yeah.
Mhm.
I want to ask Allison, since we're there, how does it feel when that line is violated? What does that bring up in you when that line is violated?
I mean, I start to second guess myself, that imposter syndrome, in terms of, okay, like you didn't practice but you preach, Allison. So it's just, I kind of beat myself over the head for it. But if I can define it as, okay, I'll work till 7 to 9 to get this DA done because it needs to get done, then I can live with that. Sometimes if it's a matter of getting these kids services faster that really, really need it, then that's an exception to crossing that line in the sand for me. So it feels bad, but I also feel like, okay, this is necessary. Like it just needs to get done. In terms of taking on other clients that I'm already feeling like my caseload is really full, I do feel bad. I worry. I'm like, okay, how do I now juggle like my current clients with adding this new client in my schedule, all the paperwork involved in it. So it does tend to get my thoughts spinning a little faster. But then I'm like, okay, like this is it for now. Let's just make a wait list. So I guess long story short, it feels good sometimes because I'm like, okay, I'm getting things done. But the other times I'm like, how do I make this work?
I was lingering on the pause button for a while. So Allison, this is her turn to be vulnerable. And what you can really see is she knows her job very well and the ins and outs and the intricacies. And I think she's also got a really good grip of where her boundaries actually are, the line in the sand, she calls them. But she's got a really good self-knowledge. Now, like me, she struggles with, I think, not wanting to disappoint, like we talked about earlier, but she has such a command of her job and of herself, and that really comes through. And that's really important, to know the self. And again, I think that often gets bypassed too in our supervision, is teaching young clinicians to know the self.
So part of your boundary crossing response is some anxiety.
Yes.
Anybody relate to that, I wonder?
I always think about Kevin from The Office. The Office is my go-to, where he's like, I'm a classic
Yes.
book overthinker. I'm like, Kevin, yes, that's me too.
Yeah, I think we can all relate to that. So I like the line in the sand. What are some other definitions of boundary? Tori, I know you have one.
Mine is kind of the same, just like the maximum, or like, I don't even know. I mean, it's the same.
Yeah.
Like, what can I deal
Yeah.
with? What is going to set me over? What's enough? What, like, yeah.
And Heather, I know you've got one.
Well, there's so many factors when it comes to boundaries. I mean, there's different levels, when it comes to workplace, emotional, physical, all of those dynamics. So kind of regarding work, it's being mindful of, just being very aware and mindful of, if there is something taking away my ability to be present with clients, to do the best I can and provide the best care I can for them, while also taking care of myself. So there's that balance. So always checking in with myself at the end of the day. How do I restore the energy lost?
Yeah.
So that's kind of my boundary, is my awareness. Like, okay, where am I at emotionally, physically?
And Heather's really good at this. She's very good about pointing out things that are restorative for her. And so I give her a lot of credit for that too, getting back to knowing the self. And Heather's done a lot of work on that. So that's really nice to see that come through. And also, as I was going through this and watching everybody, and this happens literally every group, I'm noticing people are very on task, which I appreciate. So often in any kind of internet Zoom meeting, you see people just off doing their own thing, and everybody here is very in tune. And so I really want to give the group some praise for that too, because that can be difficult to pull off. And that says to me they are invested in the material. And it's not always easy, and not every group is a great one. I think this group went very well, but there are groups and individual supervision sessions that just are boring as can be. And so it's nice to see this group session, again, going so well and really seeing people invested and in tune.
Checking in with how I'm feeling at the end of the day, on, is my body tired? Am I really, really just emotionally exhausted? I have nothing left. And if that is the case, then how can I restore that?
So for you, it's really kind of analyzing, how do I feel at the end of the day? Is, if, where's the energy? And if I'm really freaking depleted, the point of I have nothing left, I probably violated a boundary in there somewhere.
Right. So
Yeah.
maybe it was in the sense of there were too many clients scheduled, back to back. Have I, in the past 2 weeks, had no cancellations or any breaks? Have I not been taking lunch?
Right.
So I reflect back and like, oh, missed lunch. I did paperwork. I broke a boundary. That's my self boundary.
I forgot. I was going to bring this up. Yeah. Does everybody take lunch during their workday, or do y'all work right through it?
I'll
I take
split
it. All right.
I don't take it very often. So that's when I know that's a boundary I'm breaking. And so I'm trying to establish that now. I know I need that half hour to hour to, even if I don't eat, take that time away, because I'm better at what I do if I do take it.
Take your lunch break. Everybody in mental health, social services, take your lunch break. Take it.
And I'm better at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And Tori, what about you? Do you ever skip lunch for clients or paperwork, or no? Okay, all right. I guess boundaries doesn't even apply to you anymore. You can just listen from this point.
She's the
I mean-
trailblazer in boundaries.
Yes,
Yes.
she's like the Lewis and Clark of our group.
Yeah, I mean, so with like lunch and eating and stuff, I have to be very particular. Like I can't miss it because it'll lead me down into a deep dark hole, and
Yeah.
it's just not a good idea. So
Yeah.
that's one thing that I won't. I mean, like I'd rather work later, I guess, than miss a lunch or something.
No, I feel the same way. Although I have to tell you, because I know somebody at the agency you work for can work 10 hours straight. It's happened, and I don't know how anybody does 10 sessions back to back. I think the most I've done is 8, and that's stupid, absolutely ridiculous. Because honestly, at the end of the day, like that, you don't even know if you're coming or going.
All right, let me be really fair here. I should really characterize it as stupid. It's stupid for me to work that many sessions in a row. Some people do it. I think, though, if you work 8 in a row or more than that, and there's nothing restorative between those sessions, the amount of readjustment you have to do to every new case, every new client, it's just staggering to me. So if you don't get a break from any of this, there is no recharge. And I tend to think that that's not really fair to your clients. But that's my opinion. And again, this is something that can very easily be debated. And I'm just giving you my thoughts on this.
Because your frontal lobe has been engaged for so long. Anybody else ever done 8, 10 in a row?
I've got a
I've done
couple
a lot
days.
of it.
Yep, during the week that it's like back to back to back, and
Wow.
I get it. It's like this is what works for some kids. But yeah, it's hard, and those are the days where I really keep in check. Okay, am I drinking my water in between sessions? I know for me, if my sugar levels crash, I'm no fun. I don't feel good, and so I try and like have a little bit of snack. And if there are breaks during the day, I get up and walk around because like I can't just sit anymore. But
Right.
yeah, those are the toughest days where you have 8, back to back, and it's like I'm good at doing it. Do I like doing it? No. I wish I had, a 15-minute break in between each, but that's just not how it works. And I'm so client driven that, I'd rather, get as many in during the day and then work like an hour or two later just to get paperwork done.
So being school based, it's even tougher because they have a schedule to keep, and you sort of need to be on par with their schedule, right?
Right. Yep. The way I schedule, I let kids pick what hour works best for them. And then
Okay.
I try and keep them on that consistent schedule if they choose to meet every week or every other week, just to keep that consistency in their life. But yeah, so I mean, like we're here from 8:30 to 3:30, and usually like at least 3 days a week, it's back to back. So always busy.
Wow.
It's a great point. So in the school-based world, sometimes you're not going to have a choice because you, again, if you are a school-based practitioner, you have to work within the confines of the school schedule. And I think that adds an additional layer of stress, and I hope that's coming out too, unlike an outpatient clinician where it's going to be really dictated by you. And if you want to take a lunch, you can do it. Well, guess what? The school-based world is different, and lunches are going to be at different times for different students. And guess what? You've got to get a student in at a particular time. You don't get a lunch. So really important to take note of those of you that are going to do school-based work.
The one thing I do like about the school is a couple of most of my kids, they take their time walking down to my office. So it's like I call them down and they take a few minutes, they kind of lollygag through the halls, and then they come to me. So I kind of just do some deep breathing before they get there. So I notice like, oh, I got like 3 to 5 minutes here.
There you go.
And so finding the positives in that, where, here I'm getting a message like they're here waiting and it's 10 minutes before the session. And I'm lucky if I can run to the restroom, or I'm like, hold on a minute, I'll be right back. But they're, and it might be just my kids that I see, but I'm grateful for my lollygaggers, because then that means like I'm more present with them too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, for mine, they show up either like a couple of minutes before even the last hour ends, or like a minute after the bell rings to dismiss kids. I'm like, holy Hannah, like you guys you guys are booking it. So,
Mhm.
yep.
And see, I have to call them down in order for them to come.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
I have a little thing on the door that says in session. And if my door is closed, there's another side that says I'm available, knock first. But when we
Okay.
start, I let them know if we're in session, you do not knock on that door.
Yep.
Mhm.
Yep. I have the
Because-
same kind of sign.
Yep.
Mhm.
Because imagine if somebody knocked on the door when you were in with me.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
No, that makes sense.
they're pretty good about it.
So Heather, you've got the lollygaggers that give you a bit of transition time. Allison, you have no
Yeah.
transition time.
You have no lollygaggers.
I'm not laughing because that's funny by itself, but isn't it interesting? There are differences in how students get to you in different school settings. Some are very slow to get to you, others are ready to go before they should even be there.
No, they are prompt and on
That's-
time.
Yeah, they certainly are. So you need to be ready to flip to a whole new agenda and regiment, like literally in seconds.
Yep.
Allison, what's it like to have to do that? To have to instantly go to a different place?
It's challenging, especially if we just ended with a really heavy session and I'm like, okay, like you literally have to switch gears, like you don't have a choice. It's hard. But you know, depending on like who comes in next, like, you know, I never have an issue with, you know, transitioning because I always try and read like the body language and the energy that they bring into the session. So if they're kind of feeling like a little down or just kind of quiet or flat, I kind of mimic that, you know, not mimic it, but like reflect it.
Right.
Just because I wouldn't want to be that annoying positive person that's like, oh, how are you doing? You know, like if they're not really feeling it that day. So, you know, it gets better over time having to flip on a switch, you know, from session to session. But yeah, I try to use the energy to my advantage of, okay, like if they're feeling a little low or, you know, whatever, I'll be in that moment with them. And, you know, that kind of helps me transition into their space and their energy. So
It's a really good point. And I don't think about this nearly enough. Matching the client's energy, and if they're in a certain mood that's presenting, trying to, and we say it, you know, let's meet the client where they're at. But I think Allison is talking about something deeper, which is, you know, tonally how a client comes in. And again, I'm just amazed how she's able to adapt to this barrage of clients back to back. But she does it very well. But yeah, very, very, very challenging to do this. And I think she's got a real talent for it.
That's exactly me at the office. Like when
Yeah.
I walk out to the waiting room, just how they're sitting,
Yeah.
I can kind of see what we're headed towards.
yep.
It's interesting that it works that way, but it does, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
The thing I was thinking is that one thing we really don't talk about a whole lot when it comes to boundaries is harm to client. And so I want to bring that up because I think it's a controversial one. But let's go back to Allison. You had a caseload waiting for you. Heather, you had a huge caseload waiting for you. Tori, I know you had a caseload. I had the caseload, 16 DAs. Can anybody really say in all this that every client was getting sufficient attention or focus from us, especially with that much work? And Heather, if you're saying your DAs took between 6 and 8 hours and you had 16, I can't do the math, but that's a lot. And that's about what mine took too. I'm thinking, have we in fact done the client some harm just because we could not be fully present? Because I can tell you, I was never fully present with my clients when I had that many DAs. I just couldn't be because I was so worried. And I want to know why that conversation doesn't happen more when it comes to boundaries. What about harm that way?
So one thing I do like to bring up in group and individual supervision are difficult, challenging topics. And we've brought up some really difficult ones in the past, from attraction to clients to do we prefer some clients over other clients? These are things we typically don't talk about. So this issue of harming client through really some negligence because of how many cases we take on, I thought this would be a great opportunity. And as you watch, you'll notice they all have an opinion about it.
Because I think people are, this is me speculating, but
Yeah.
I think people gravitate towards harm to a client is Are we saying mean things to them in session? Are we touching them when they didn't give consent? Things like that. If we think about harm, but if we think about the point that you brought up, I'll be honest, I've never thought about it that way. Am I being fully present or giving the best attention or care because my head is thinking about all the other things on my to-do list within this job? I'll be the first to admit that.
Oh, this is like Allison No Holds Barred to her today.
You know me, I'm blunt.
I like it. What else? Tori, Heather, what do you guys think?
So one thing that I've always felt I'm really, really good at or I excel at is being present with somebody.
Love that Heather's advocating, and she is good at this. I've supervised her individually before, and she's absolutely present. And so to see her reflect on her strength, that's just really beautiful.
Even when there's a lot going on, like I have all this paperwork, but really thinking about it, I'm sure at some level I'm not as present as I would be if I didn't have all the other things going on in my head. But oftentimes when I go into a session with somebody, all of that kind of just disappears. So, yes, absolutely. I think it does affect me if I really look at it, because there's no way that completely shuts off.
Right. And I think I'm the same way. I think I can compartmentalize it, but I can guarantee there were times where I was probably sitting there thinking, can we please get the session done, because it's boring and I'm not very engaged and I need to get these things done. I just think it becomes that issue we don't talk about because it's too frightening to talk about. And yet at the same time, it's also downplayed. Absolutely. Yeah. But I think, again, in terms of boundaries, that ought to be one that comes up way more often than it does.
Okay, so newsflash that you probably already know. We are a shame-based profession. Mental health professionals exist in a shame-based world because there is something sacred about working with people, and that's why we love it. We absolutely love the sacredness of working with people. But that doesn't mean that we are without our flaws. And for anybody to say that they've been so busy, but they've always kept everything in perspective and they've never not thought ahead, that's a complete fabrication because we've all done it. But it's a painful thing to admit. And the more that you new clinicians come into the field, you're going to see what people don't want to admit. And I am completely convinced, the reason mistakes get made and negligence occurs is because people do not feel like they can bring these things up. And so my hope is you're part of a group or individual supervision type of environment where it is okay to bring up anything without shame, judgment, and without embarrassment. Any of those things.
Right.
Absolutely.
And having a 45-person caseload, again, with that much paperwork, that is extreme. I mean, that represents to me one of the most extreme examples I've ever heard.
Well, and if I'm not healthy in establishing boundaries, kind of that imposter syndrome, right? Practice what you preach.
Right.
So if I'm overwhelmed, I have too many things going on, clients are going to see that. So whether I'm mindful of it or not, I'm sure it shows.
You ever had a client call you out and just say, you seem like you're off your game today, or you don't seem as energetic? Tori's smiling.
That's never happened to me.
It's never happened to me either, but I've often wondered, have they picked up on it? Because there'll be some times where they show up and I'm just like not in the right headspace, and I know my tone is not where it needs to be, and I'm like, oh God, Allison, not cool. So that's something I have to keep in check. Is okay, like I know I'm overwhelmed with these things. You have to be mindful about your tone and energy because kids are sponges. They soak it up. They read it.
It's a great point. And whether it's a child client or an adult client, we wonder what they're thinking sometimes. Like, are they looking at us thinking, you have no energy today, Nance? Or what you said was just really dumb. Most clients, though, will never challenge us that way or even ask those questions, because I think for clients that can be kind of slippery too. But notice we're all thinking about it, right? What do our clients really think about us? And what are they picking up on that we're trying to hide or that maybe we're not conscious of?
And
I've
they
been called out.
remember. Yeah. Yeah. It gets me thinking, though. Yeah. How many times have they been aware of it but never said anything to me? Uh, because you're right. I think they do pick up on this stuff. But a lot of times they don't feel empowered enough to say it because they take the role of the client. So I can't tell my therapist. Oh, I say tell your therapist if they seem out of sorts or tired. Come on, tell them.
Mm-hmm.
Told my therapist before. I'm like, what's going on with you today?
Yeah.
Doesn't seem right. Yeah.
Oh, I've had clients tell me that because I let them know, like, if I seem distracted or anything, let me know. You know, it goes both ways. I'm honest with you, you're honest with me. But yeah, I've had them be like, you don't seem like yourself today.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a great point. So letting your clients know that you may not be at your best. Well, I don't know why that's such a bad thing, but even that comes under scrutiny. Again, as if they're not going to pick up on it. It's amazing what clients can pick up on. So I'm really glad to be hearing this, that at least in our group, it is okay to say, I may not be having a great day today. I may not be as receptive. I'm essentially modeling for you what it's like to be human. I'll say that again. I'm modeling for you what it's like to be human.
Yeah.
And so I'm like,
And
really?
maybe, yeah,
What
and
is
maybe
it-
in some
what
ways
is it
that's
not myself. So then we talk about it. Yeah.
I think that's sort of a boundary too in some ways. Maybe it's like a reverse boundary, but it kind of is because it's setting up the parameters of how the dialogue is going to go. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate that we can talk about that dangerous stuff because again, I think boundaries does not often get associated with client harm. And I think you're right. When we think client harm, we think so much more intentional when in fact you could have a client that's self-harming or suicidal and they could be saying it in a way that's not direct. You miss it. But how often is that seen as harm to client? Not very often, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But it certainly can be.
So I hope you enjoyed that, and doing it live was an amazing experience. It's really fun to do this, and I'm so happy to be able to share this with you. I hope you got a lot out of it. I hope you got some questions answered, but I really hope it also provokes some questions in you as well. This is Eric Nance with the Dark Side of Therapy. As always, please like this video, please subscribe for more great content, and come back anytime.